Well, do the words spirit and soul mean the same thing?
The word spirit can have a very wide meaning. It's derived from the Latin word spiritus, meaning a breath. Then, because the soul of man is as invisible to bodily eyes as a breath, and also because its presence is manifested by the breathing of a living body, the word spirit acquired a transferred sense, becoming a substitute for the word soul. If then we intend by the word spirit the principle of life in a man, that principle which enables him to live, to know and to love, to be happy or to be sorrowful, then the spirit is the soul. And in a further sense, because a man's dispositions depend upon his soul, we use the word spirit for character, and thus speak of a man's spirit. But this is only the soul manifesting itself in a man's external conduct. The soul, therefore, is the living principle which makes the difference between a living man and a corpse, and spirit and soul in this sense mean the same thing.
Well, is not the soul the breath of God?
No, for God is a spirit, a purely spiritual substance, and does not breathe. The expression is only a human way of putting things. The soul is a spirit, and is called the breath of God merely because caused or created by God in its spiritual or breath-like nature.
Well, you speak of the soul as being immortal.
Yes, the body is naturally mortal, the soul, by its very nature, immortal.
What indications have you that the soul is immortal?
That the soul will, and indeed must, survive the death of the body is demonstrable from many points of view. Firstly, its essential structure forbids dissolution by death. Death is the disintegration of parts. Only composite things can die. Yet the soul is not composite. Its power of pure immaterial thought proves its independence of matter. It is endowed with spiritual faculties, and is as spiritual as the faculties it possesses, which will enable it to live and operate when separated from the body. Not being material, it can never be destroyed or fall to pieces like matter. Nor would God endow it with a nature essentially fitted to live on just for an idle freak, and with the intention of annihilating it after all. Secondly, every individual experiences a sense of moral obligation, and every obligation demands a sufficient sanction. If the state said, "This is the law," and I replied, "Well, what if I do not observe it?" It would be ludicrous were the state to reply, "Oh, nothing will happen. I say only that it is the law. If you break it, you break it, I suppose." Well, that would be a joke, not a law. Now, I know that I shall have to answer some day for my attitude towards the interior sense of moral obligation. I can go right through this life without encountering anyone capable of judging me concerning it. The real answer must be given at the judgment seat of God, and my soul will have to be there. Consequently, it must survive. Thirdly, a more universal view of human life shows us the many inequalities which offend against the sense of justice. We know that justice will be done some day, and as it is not always done in this life, it will be done in the next. This implies our presence, and therefore our living on after death. Fourthly, every soul naturally has an insatiable natural desire for happiness, and for lasting happiness. No earthly or temporal good can satisfy this hunger. Yet this innate natural tendency cannot lack its rightful object. As well try to conceive the existence of the human eye, perfectly adapted to sight, yet without the possibility of light anywhere to enable it to see. Reflection, then, upon the simple structure of the soul, upon the future administration of the sanctions attached to the moral law, upon the rectification of worldwide inequalities, and upon the teleological inclinations to a lasting and perfect good, makes it a violation of reason to deny the survival of the soul.
The injustices of this life demand another life, but why not posit reincarnation?
Justice does say that this life cannot be all, but the idea of reincarnation is a mistaken notion based upon your notion that life is impossible unless on this earth. But there is no need for another life on this earth, which would involve further inequalities. There is a better life than this afterwards and elsewhere, but reincarnation is a myth.
Well, your doctrine of immortality supposes consciousness after death. And that's very hard to believe. Otherwise, the soul would be conscious under chloroform or when the body is knocked senseless in an accident.
This fact does not invalidate the reasons given already and is also easily explained. The soul, whilst in a state of union with the body, operates by using the faculties of that body. If the sense instruments are incapacitated, the soul can no longer operate adequately whilst united to the body. But once released from the body, its intelligence and will and power to love at once assert themselves. Hydrogen and oxygen unite to form a drop of water. They can operate as water only whilst united. Hydrogen is there, but it cannot operate as hydrogen unless released from the union. Soul and body make one human being, and both elements must be fit to cooperate in the activities of a bodily human being. The soul cannot operate separately as a distinct unit whilst still united, but once released, it can operate independently every bit as much as hydrogen when released from its essential union with oxygen to form water.
Well, why should the fact of our being born give us the right to exist forever?
It's not the mere fact of being born, but of being born with such a nature. The soul is fitted by its very nature to live on forever, for a spiritual entity cannot disintegrate and die. Why should we have been endowed with such a nature? Because he who made us chose to give us such a nature. Since we did not make ourselves, we did not give ourselves our rights. They came from the one who is responsible for our being. If an artist painted an image of a girl on canvas, and the image were endowed with the power of speech, the girl might say, "What right have you to give me brown hair?" And the artist would rightly reply, "Since I made you, I have the right to give you whatever colored hair I wish." And God had the right to create indestructible souls if he wished. He did so, and our right to live on is vested in his will to endow us with an immortal nature.
Well, I can't imagine what this future life can possibly be like.
Well, there is a vast difference between imagining a future life and conceiving it. This is the difference between imagination and thought. I cannot imagine or picture the future life any more than you are able to do so. The only images we could form would be derived from this life and would fit this life, not the next. Yet although we cannot imagine what the next life will be like, we can conceive the fact that it will be, and also the intelligible principles by which it will be regulated.
Do you think that the future spiritual world is an educational one?
Well, not in the sense you probably intend. We are now progressing towards our final destination. There we shall have attained it. The one exception is in the case of a soul that goes to purgatory, where it undergoes a progressive purification, fitting it for the vision of God. This cannot strictly be called educational, but it is a spiritual evolution towards perfect holiness.
It is a fact that we are material beings, and we cannot believe in spiritual things which our minds cannot conceive.
That is a most extravagant assertion. It is true that we are material beings as regards our bodily frame, but we are not merely material. Our flesh and blood cannot think. We have intelligence also, and we believe things with our mind, not with our flesh and blood. We cannot be expected to believe in things which our minds cannot conceive, but when you suggest that we cannot conceive things spiritual, you hopelessly confuse your imagination, which you possess in common with brute animals, and your reason, which is proper to man. If you stood side by side with a horse, both sets of eyes could see chalk marks on a blackboard, but in addition, you would see an intelligible meaning in the writing which the animal could never discern. You have a higher and nobler faculty, which is not merely material. As a matter of fact, you have disproved your assertion by speaking. You could also disprove it by writing it down. For whether you write or whether you speak, both are manifestations of ideas that cannot be seen with the eyes. You have conceived ideas which you have committed to writing, or you could conceive ideas which you could commit to speaking. So, ideas are not material things. You cannot saw them up and burn them as so many logs of wood.